Welcome back, War Room fans. Okay, so here's going to be the first video on Germany, and I've been putting a lot of thought in it since last time we talked. And before we start doing all the strategy videos and talking about a lot of the concepts, I decided to do something different that I've never done. So basically what I did was I basically call this order of battle, and maybe use that to kind of glean some insight into like the balance of the game to kind of give us a better idea of what we need to do specifically when it comes to Germany. So here's what I did. So instead of placing all the units in their standard, configuration, this is the start of the game. So over here, there's our Russian, I'm going to call them because we're going to only talk about the European theater because we're talking about Germany. So these are the potential Russian reinforcements. This is actually what Russia starts the game with. And we're going to go in a little bit in depth on each one of these areas. And squaring off against them, these are all the German units. Okay. Now, the units I pulled for the Russian front is basically Finland, everything underneath the troops in Poland. Okay. Then over here, we have the western side which is Germany, France, Denmark, and Norway, and all their naval. And these are the guys that start the game, and we're going to say they're going against the Western Allies. So over here, these are all the British and American troops. Okay, and I even put the Russians over there, their Navy, because we all know they're going to be coming over to Britain anyway. Okay, and we're going to talk about the Western Allies compared to the Western defense of Germany, what they're squaring off against them. Then down here, I actually this is the British, including the South Africans and the Middle Eastern guys. The Indian guys aren't here. This is basically what they start the game, or within like 2 turns would have up here when the South Africans show up. And this is what's squaring off against them, if you elect to send the 59th over to Egypt and not try to defend North Africa. And then right here in the middle is we have the Italians. And why I separated the Italians out is because in a lot of these war plans, these Italian troops are kind of like the reinforcements for Germany on all 3 major aspects of the game. We're going to do a Russian push. We need to defend over here. Are we coming down here? These are kind of the guys who will form up those reinforcements to go to whichever direction you want them to. Because obviously at the beginning of the game, they're not just going to be sitting in Italy or the Balkans, trying to defend those territories. You're going to want to move them out to one of the 3 fronts, or 2 of the 3 fronts, or if you have a really bold plan, all 3 fronts. But you only have limited guys. So as you can see, the Italians, when they're coming up to help out Germany, they only have 2 armor, 2 artillery, and 6 infantry split between 3 commands. And then obviously we have a reserve of 3 fighters and a bomber. So that's kind of Germany's like reserves or reinforcements. Now, I'm looking for my command stick. I will be back after I find my command stick. Command stick of power has been found. I don't like putting my chubby fingers down there because I know you guys don't like to look at them. So, let's just start with the order of battle. Let's just talk about the big one over here in Russia, okay? So as we can see in Russia, I tried to keep them in 8 stacks. So we got 16 plus, 22 infantry squaring off against 12. Obviously a big advantage. Germany has 8 artillery and Russia has 8 artillery. So, it's parity. We got 5 tanks going up against 7 tanks. So on the front, we got 6 fighters and a bomber against 6 fighters. So in every respect, the two sides are at parity, except for Russia's obvious superiority in just total infantry. But otherwise, these units are all even. The main advantage Germany does is they do have 2 extra armor. Okay, so that's not a huge advantage for Germany when it comes to the Russian front. So when we start talking about the tactics, like, are we going to do Operation Blue? Are we going to do Cobra Kai? Are we going to do a balanced approach? What are we doing? This always has to be in the back of our brains, that on this front, Germany has a slight advantage in offensive power because they do have a couple more tanks. But Russia obviously is really beefed up on the infantry. So for their defense, it's hard to get through those guys. I mean, that's, 16 plus 6, 22. I mean, that's 44 hits just on infantry. Okay, and if we start doing the math, even on a 30 combat situation, you realistically are going to hit like 3.5 yellows. So even if we round up and say you should hit 4 in each batch, that's 12 on each major engagement of 30 combat dice. That's basically 3 battles just to knock out their infantry. If we had a crazy example where every single unit on both fronts is in one territory duking it out. Okay. Now, notice here though, they have 7 commands, you have 6. So you have a little bit more leeway in moving troops, although Russia will get put to a certain point where it doesn't really matter for them. Once they become stagnated, they're not moving guys. So that's not really an advantage for Germany, but it can be in the beginning of the game, because Russia is going to have to move these guys around, and that's where these battle plans come in, on where we can attack them weak, where we can maybe do some maneuvering on them. That's not obviously covered in this video. This is just to kind of show you where the balance of the game starts out, so we can decide what we need to do. Now over here, if Russia, let's say, bails on their plan of defense over there, then all of a sudden, this balance now, so now they've taken an artillery advantage, they've expanded their infantry advantage on us, and they've closed the gap on the armor. Okay, so, that would obviously, if they, missed the infantry. So obviously if Russia did something like that on the opening turn, just moved everything back into Moscow, or just Russia proper, then obviously Japan, that would be a cue that they might as well take advantage of that situation over there and just start gobbling territory. But that's a different video, but that's just to show you, if they do something like that, then Russia, has taken a slight advantage on artillery, huge advantage on infantry, and closed the gap on the tanks. So now Germany's relative strength against them has been severely diminished to the point where it's parity, but teetering in Russia's favor. So as we start talking about these tactics, these battle plans, you can kind of see where the balance of power is. And so that's why, like when I said, you know, how convoluted can Operation Blue be? I mean, it's Ukraine attacking Caucasus, but it's this balance. And when I said the movement behind the front is what these operations, you know, that's a big part of these is like how many of these troops we're going to bring up to, you know, to bolster these guys to take on all these guys. So, you know, you bring up 2 more armor. So, and let's just say Russia brings back everything from the Far East. Now, instead of having a 1 armor advantage, you got a 3 armor advantage. You know, they almost double us up 2 to 1 on infantry. But when we talk air power, we now have 9 fighters and a bomber to their 6 fighters and a bomber. So looking at that aspect of it, the obvious one advantage the Axis do have over Russia is through air power. So that will be key to a lot of our Russian plans is how, if we go well on the ground, we're at parity, but dipping more on the Russian ledger, even with the Italians up. Well, where can we find an advantage? Well, that advantage will be found in air power. So air power will be a big component of a lot of these Russian front discussions, because that's really the only area at the beginning of the game. And remember, guys, because of the 1 turn delay, any units we build aren't even moving till turn 3. So this is the balance of power through the first 2 turns. Okay, so that's you always have to keep that in the back of your brain when we're looking at all these units, is that this is what it is for the first 2 turns of the game. And sometimes these plans do, I know if you guys have been watching a lot of my videos on these nations, I don't really talk about production very often, just kind of give you broad guidelines. And it's really for 2 reasons. One, it's just there's such a variety of build strategies you can do, but also they're really dependent on which strategies you're trying, but also this idea that reinforcements in War Room don't really start entering the game until turn 3. So they start, you know, the reinforcements arrive kind of after my window of these strategies we talk about. And that's also one of the reasons why in War Room, because of the way the reinforcements go, the game does, you know, that's, when Bryce and I play this game, you know, realistically, the game usually goes out to about 6, 7 turns, and then, you know, one side or the other throws in the towel, or if we couldn't finish the game, it's looking really like one side is going to pull it out. And that's really, I think, at the end of the day, because of the reinforcements. They're so late arriving into the war that if you really botch it at the beginning and have a bad battle plan, by the time the reinforcements start showing up, it's already too late. You're already way behind the 8 ball, and it just starts snowballing on you. Okay, so enough of that. So that's the force composition on the Russian front. Now, one of the things, though, I'm about to switch over to the Western side, is that these troops, except for the few that are on the Far East, which in theory they could rail line in on the opening turn and there's nothing you can do about it. So these are the forces that are going to be engaged in the first 2 turns. There's no variables, okay? You know, like when I talked about down here, there is a variable, meaning one of the artillery and one of the infantry can't even arrive in Egypt till turn 3. So on the first 2 turns, you know, that's it. It's 2 tanks, 2 infantry, and 3 artillery squaring off against 2 tanks, 3 artillery, and 5 infantry. So on the land, the Axis, their advantages, they have a 2 infantry advantage. Otherwise, all the forces are at parity. So where do we have another slight advantage? Well, we got 2 fighters, they got 1 to start off the game. So we have basically a 1 fighter advantage and a 2 infantry advantage. Otherwise, the front on the ground is pretty much well even. Now, one of the things about the naval in the Med, we have 3 ships. I said the British bring in the I-2 force out of the Indian Ocean. So, they have 4 against our 3, but we do have a dreaded battleship, okay? Now, also remember, though, guys, that carrier, if it comes in, never forget about that. That's a free plane for them. So, technically, they have parity in the air if that aircraft carrier comes up. So, they'll have 2 fighters against our 2 fighters. So, this battle, though, between the navies, those 4 units against these 3 units, is pretty even. If you just decide, if everybody does the M3, all the Navy is sitting out here, and you crash the 2 navies in, if you don't bring in any air power, well, the British will have 1 fighter, on our guys. So that's going to tip it a little bit for the British. The British most likely have about a 60% shot of winning that battle. Well, maybe not even 60%, because remember, guys, that's the other thing about this game, is that, we got port advantage for each side, free repairs. So if they don't blow up our battleship, there's a pretty good chance Italy will still have their battleship. I've seen it numerous times where we wipe out, both cruiser. It's basically a battleship against a CV, or a battleship against a cruiser and a CV. So I guess one of the things also, when we just talk about combat in general in War Room, sometimes, we keep using these terms like we would in Axis and Allies, or any of the, the counter games like World in Flames or whatever, where when we have a battle, there is a victor and a loser. That, we're going to resolve the combat until nothing's left. Well, it doesn't work that way in War Room, and that's also why, battleships linger forever, because it's just, quite frankly, it's hard to kill battleships. So, once again, though, let's keep talking about the strategy, the implications of that. So, Italy, regardless of what happens in this M3 thing, is if England brings all their navy up, even if Italy does somehow take them all out, you're only going to have 1 ship left, and it's going to be your battleship. And so that just presents the question to the Italian player, just, the Axis in general, do we actually invest in repurchasing some naval for Italy? And by doing that, though, it basically locks out, it helps keep the Med kind of intact and don't get the Americans and British down there as easily, because they don't have to contend against the Navy. But then again, if you start doing that, then you're not going to be able to build much else for Italy. So we'll get into that. But that's where the balance is. It's a slight advantage to the British in naval, and a slight advantage in land to the Axis. Now, let's slide on over here. Here it is, guys. So these are the German forces that are in Norway, Denmark, Germany, and France. So as we can see, in the naval power, we got 6 subs and 2 cruisers, taking on 3 battleships, 4 cruisers, and 1 sub. So we're at parity on total units, but obviously the British and Americans have a huge advantage in quality of naval units, which in itself brings up problems, just because, if we're at parity in numbers, but they have better quality, that's looking grim, okay? It also, I think, leads to a lot of discussions of how subs are pointless and stupid in this game. And some of that, I really think the root of it is the way the game starts with parity. That, you know, it's like the subs just don't do anything because they're too easy to kill. And another reason why they have that feeling, I think, is let's take a look at just the air power. 6 fighters, 3 bombers. Now, one of the advantages Germany does have is I put all the U.S., the central and eastern United States, those are the only Americans here, and the eastern Canadians. They, unlike the Russian front, in order for the allies to get, the Western allies to get to this point of force, this is like what it's going to look like on turn 3 of the game if you don't kill any of these guys. Notice, though, the huge advantage they have in air power. 4 bombers to our 3, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 fighters to our 6. So they almost outnumber us 2 to 1 in air. Now, in armor, they have 6. Germany's got 6. They got 3 artillery, but Germany does have 9. Which then, again, that brings up another discussion we'll talk about in some of the tactics, is that 9 artillery, you know, they're obviously very nice to have in combat on that Russian front, but you have an inherent, you know, 18 anti-air you can distribute, you know, in Greater Germany and France or wherever you feel their strap bombers are going, okay? But I'm going to come back to the naval thing. That's, you know, they have 7 ships, we have 7. But the thing I think that drives the German player crazy is that the Allies have so much spare air power, they can cover pretty much, well, the whole Atlantic with just like 1 fighter in each zone. And there's absolutely nothing those German subs can do. They just eventually get hunted down by spare aircraft and just whittle the strength down of Germany. And, you know, I told you guys we're going to talk about, like, if Germany and Italy want to build a navy, how we're going to go about doing that, okay? But as you can see, on the land power side, once the Americans get over here to Britain on turn 3, which means they'll be in this A7 zone here with all those troops, we're at parity on the armor, and we're at basically parity with like a 2-unit advantage in infantry and a heavy artillery advantage. Okay, so where's our advantage? On land, it's only in artillery. We're at a serious 2 to 1 disadvantage when it comes to air. And we're at parity at sea. So we need to find like the weakness of the Western allies. How can we go at them with our starting forces and stave them off? Now, one of the things though about that 1 turn delay on production is, at least on this front, on the Western front over here, you're going to be able to get reinforcements in. You know, you're going to probably get 2 rounds of reinforcements to put with these guys, however you do it, before out of A7, the Western allies even start attacking you. So you do have you have time at least. So that is one of the nice advantages, even though you look at the numbers and go, well, this is, you know, there's certain aspects like this air is really out of whack. You know, we're at a real disadvantage here. We're at a disadvantage in quality here. So we got 2 of our 3 aspects where we're at a serious disadvantage here. We're at a real big disadvantage here in numbers. But if we use these guys as defensive units, then these guys bolster, you know, our air defense. So that kind of counteracts how many air units the Western allies have. And I mean, if we added this up, as I said, we got 9, that's 18. I mean, that in itself, an anti-air, if you had them in one territory, let's say Germany, and they come in, I mean, that's the equivalent of 6 fighters defending Germany. If you, let's say, just put them all in Germany and said, well, I'm not going to let them strap bomb Germany, or I'm not going to let them strap bomb France. You know, if you put them all in one territory, that's a really, you know, formidable anti-air situation, especially if you had some fighters with them. So that's just part of the strategies that we're going to be discussing by looking at these opening strengths. Where are there cracks? Where are there places where Germany, you know, can take advantage of because we have a superiority? Or where do we have to kind of focus in on and really hone in on a good tactics or battle plans to negate a lot of our weaknesses? Because one of the things is, you know, we just went through all the major fronts. There's no one front where Germany, or I should say, yeah, just Germany and Italy, they don't have, like on one of these 3 fronts, they don't have a noticeable advantage over the Allies. They have slight advantages in some aspects, but they don't have overwhelming advantage. So that's what makes it tricky for Germany. There is a lot of planning involved, being sound on our battle plans, being sound on the foundations of how combat works, how movement works. You know, once again, talking about turn order, how important initiative is in this game, dictating the turn order. Okay. And then I really think in these German videos, after each one, at the very end of each of these videos, we will start talking about build strategies. In fact, I might just put pen to paper one day and write out, you know, first 3 turns of just production strategies, because that really plays in big with Germany. You know, also being good with your kind of knowing with your initial production, you know, kind of the combinations that you can purchase, so that on turn 3, you know, you're not caught behind the 8 ball because you kind of messed up on your first turn. You go, well, it's just the first turn. It's not a big deal, but it is a big deal, because if you screw up the first turn of purchases, and let's just say, you know, you go, well, with Germany, you know, I'm not opening turn with my 6 oil, you know, I'm going to build 4 tanks and a plane. Okay, so at the end of that first turn, you know, that's kind of the build plan you go down, but something catastrophic happens, you know, on some other unit type, like, well, I just lost pretty much almost all my Navy. You know, unfortunately, because I screwed up on Russia, I ended up losing a stack, so I lost some artillery, some infantry, another tank. You know, that could really mess you up, because that's your first wave of defense against the Allies. And so we need to get good on purchasing too, on the various strategies, because not every strategy kind of has the same build plan. And I'll also, I think in that, I'll kind of allude to some of the Allied purchases, especially Russia. You know, what to expect out of Russia and how we can combat that. So I'm going to end the first video here, guys, so we've kind of laid out, you know, the force disposition, the order of battle for basically the entire European theater, so you can get a better grasp of the balance and show you guys how these different battle plans can hopefully tip that balance in Germany's favor, because they're not starting off with a numerical advantage basically anywhere. So right off the bat, it is a little bit of an uphill climb, but I think with a solid battle plan, a solid foundation of how the game works, you definitely can overcome that and have a really good chance of success. So I will be back with the next video, guys. I'll do Operation Blue, the Caucasus, Volga area of the map, the traditional battle plan, and we will start getting into these various battle plans. Talk to you guys later. Bye.